Let's go ahead and put the phone away, please. Ms. Tucker. I'm assuming that you're using it as a violation of your social norm. Is that what you're doing?
Which one?
Your phone. That would be a violation of the school rules, and again, you cannot justify doing that, okay? Yeah, you can't do that. All right, question number 1, one-word definition for ethnocentrism. Jake? Judgment. Judgment of the culture based upon the standards of one's own, right? Number 2, cultural relativism. What would that be, Ms. Maggie? Respect for another culture's characteristics. Very good. The opposite of ethnocentrism, and like I said yesterday, doesn't necessarily mean you have to like them. You don't have to be the best friend, but you do, have an awareness or understanding of why they do what they do. That's cultural relativism. Number 3, assimilation. Jason?
Partial.
Partial is a good guess. Got it mixed up with acculturation. I mixed up the order.
Oh.
Assimilation is?
Oh.
Jake? Full. Yeah, full. So it's a full acceptance of other culture's characteristics. It takes a long time, and sometimes you can't do it inside of your own life. It'd be a generational thing. The next generation may be able to fully assimilate, okay? Number 4, acculturation. Ms. Sweeney? We can do this in a very short amount of time. Speak another language or learn another language. Or eat food or dress like somebody from a different culture. That would be acculturation. Cultural diffusion. One more definition there. Brandon, you remember?
Pass.
It begins with an S. Miss Nason? Spread. So you're going to diffuse or spread your cultural ideas or cultural characteristics out from your culture to other cultures. Okay, I encourage you to take out a sheet of notebook paper. We're going to take a few notes today on different types of culture.
What about the Bell Workplace?
From yesterday, we'll do that at the end since I've got the audio recording going. Let's go ahead and go right into.
Wait, will this be on? No, Can I do notes on my computer? What's wrong with you?
Alright, subcultures and countercultures and variations within culture is going to be our focus today. Subcultures, countercultures, variations within cultures. Essentially what we're doing is we're getting a list of a large number of different types of cultures, yes?
Do you know how many more weeks are on this 9 weeks?
I think March 15th is what we're looking at, right? So that's your window of opportunity to get all of your missed assignments done as well. Appreciate you asking, and that way we can communicate that to everybody. We will have a test. It's looking like probably the end of next week, maybe. I was looking at the schedule this morning. Now we'll have one more week of content, and then the test will be the following Tuesday, so right before the March 15th. Sound good? Or the following Wednesday will be our test, okay? All right. Our objectives today: identify characteristics of subcultures, countercultures. We got a little bit of a puzzle for us to figure out. This is a test question. It's a tough one. Students have a tendency to miss this one quite a bit. It's actually true-false type of question on the assessment, and we still have a tendency to miss it. Maybe we're just overly confused by the concept. But what do the images kind of portray? It's this idea plus this idea equals this. So what's this one first? Yeah, industrialization, okay? So it's like industrialization plus this. What's this? Okay, what does that represent? Technology, right? So industrialization plus technology leads to, what's this? What would that be? Nobody knows what that is? Jason?
It looks.
A floppy disk? No, man.
It's supposed to be the abstract.
No, not so much.
I really don't understand what it is.
All right, it's like the.
It's really good gear.
Yeah, it's got a lot of gears inside of it. So it's the inside of a clock, is what it is. The inside of a clock. And if you ever open up the clock and look inside of it, it's not the simplest, mechanism. It's fairly complex, and that's the idea that I'm trying to get across. Okay, when you have industrialization, society industrializes and eventually progresses beyond industrialization to a post-industrial type of society, plus the advent of technology. Right? When you have those things together, what happens to society? It becomes much, much more complex. Okay? You can think about the other, and you have a lot of variations in culture as a result of that. The other extreme would be no industrialization, no technology, right? If we go backwards and reverse ourselves, then you're going more of an agrarian type of economy. If you go back even farther than that, before the domestication of plants and animals, then you would have a hunting and gathering type of society, right? How complex is a hunting and gathering society? Not very complex at all, right? There's not much social stratification. Everybody's on the same level. It's not like, hey, that guy over there, man, he's really rich, right? He's a really good, whatever. He's a hunter, a gatherer. He's a really good gatherer. He's really rich. I wish I was as good a gatherer as he was, or as he is, right? It doesn't happen in a hunting and gathering society. Everybody is the same. But when you get industrialization and technology, you get all these variations in culture. You know what I mean? Okay? So that's the idea that I want to get. And, what are we in? We're in a post-industrial type of society, We, with industrialization, that's like the advent of like factories and production, right? You're producing different types of materials. Most jobs today that we have in our environment, I mean, there are still factory jobs that are out there, but in comparison to, the other types of, we're a service-based economy. We're not a product-based economy anymore, right? All of our jobs are either in the tech field or in the medical field or sales, something, right? It's not you're producing a product. You're not making something necessarily. Okay, that doesn't happen very often anymore. So we are an extremely advanced type of social environment, so it's very complex. Okay. Second concept for today: 3 options when cultures collide. I say 3, but there's really like 4 or 5. Okay. So the first option is move. Okay, I want you to think about the relationship between European colonialists and Amerindian groups. Okay. That's really the background information, or the good example for us to think about whenever cultures collide. Okay, so an example of moving would be like the Trail of Tears. You guys heard of the Trail of Tears before, right? So the American colonists, the United States government, really at that point in time, they just said, hey, you got to get off and you got to move, and you got to go to Oklahoma. You've got to go out west, Utah, someplace, to a reservation that we've given you or defined. This is where your area is now relegated to. Okay. Another option, when cultures collide, you can fight to maintain your presence in that particular location. There's a movie. It's about depicting the time of the French and Indian War. It's called The Last of the Mohicans. Anybody heard of or seen The Last of the Mohicans before? It's like from the late 1980s, 1990s. It's a really intense movie, though. It's pretty good stuff. If you've never seen The Last of the Mohicans, it's got one heck of a soundtrack as well. You should check it out. It's some really good stuff about American history there. But it's about this Amerindian group that they are pretty much dwindling, and what they do is they don't run away. They try to fight until the very end. All right? And essentially their culture group becomes extinct. They assimilate. You can assimilate into the surrounding culture. They had this concept called prayer towns. A lot of times in early colonial history, a lot of times this gets missed, skipped over. They would have these prayer towns were settlements that were like these intermediaries between the Amerindian culture and the English American colonial life, right? And it was an opportunity for these Amerindians to come and to assimilate into the European way of life, so they could get clothes and they could get food, they could learn the English language, become educated like an Englishman, all right? And so they could assimilate into the American culture, what usually happened was the Amerindians, when things got rough, they would go to the prayer towns and then they'd run away and go back and forth all the time. Okay, so it really didn't work out all that well. Ultimately, when cultures collide, when a more powerful culture dominates a smaller culture, what happens? The smaller culture faces what? The dinosaur gives it away. Extinction. The smaller culture faces extinction. Sound good? And that's a struggle. That's a challenge. Okay. There's a particular Amerindian group from the American Southwest. There's some mystery surrounding them. I can't remember the name of them off the top of my head, but they're associated with the Hopi or Pueblo Indians, and they just pretty much disappeared. And the idea is that really over the course of many generations, they just really assimilated into the more dominant Amerindian cultures around them. Okay, so they disappeared, but they really intermingled with the surrounding community. Okay, all right. So other variations within culture. So when culture becomes more and more complex, you have different ways in which we can approach culture, different types of culture. So the first two, we have them in groups of two here. You have ideal culture and you have real culture. Ideal culture and real culture. Ideal culture is where you have norms and values a society adheres to in principle. You may want to write out to the side. It's a little bit confusing. You know, these are the things that we would like to think we do. These are the things that we'd like to think that we do. Sound good? We would like to think that everybody is free. Everybody is equal. Everybody is treated the same. We would like to think that when you come to the United States, there's no aspects of discrimination or racism or prejudice or anything like that. We would like to think that men and women are given the same opportunities in the workplace, right? That's an American ideal, okay? We'd like to think that. We want that to happen, okay? But then again, we have real culture, which is norms and values of democracy, norms and values a society adheres to in practice. So this is what really happens. You may write that out to the side. So you got principle on one side, and then you got practice on the other. Okay, this is what really happens when it comes to differentiating that ideal and real culture. We talk about these things quite a bit in global cultures because us as America, we have a lot of ideals, right? And we're taught these things when we grow up in our early elementary system, right? That America is this, this, and this. But then when you start separating yourself and get the blinders off a little bit, you realize that American culture isn't exactly that. We would like to think that we are this, but we're actually not this, okay? So in this particular case, you got some examples here, with the difference in sexes. We'd like to think that there's equality between men and women, but statistically speaking, there's not. Men get paid more than women do on average. It's not as bad as it used to be, but there still is some separation between men and women and how much they make. Okay? Another example would be we pride ourselves as being a democracy, right? Where individuals have an opportunity to participate in government, citizens have an opportunity to participate in government. But when you look at the percentage of the population that actually goes off and votes, is it a really big percentage or is it a really small percentage? It's a really small percentage. So, you have an opportunity to vote, but a lot of people don't take advantage of that opportunity, okay? They don't participate in the democracy, okay? And then you got other aspects, we think about democracy as anybody could, the ideal is that anybody could become president, right, of the United States. But the reality today is if you're going to have a campaign, right, how much money do you have to have? A lot. You have to have a lot of money, right? It's getting more and more. They have these super PACs. You guys ever heard of super PACs before? PACS stands, it's an acronym for something. But you have to have so much money to get yourself involved in politics today, okay? Another example, difference between ideal and real culture. ideal culture, from the conservative viewpoint of maybe our community and maybe traditional communities in American society, and talking about sexual relations in marriage, used to be, looked down upon. Today, it doesn't happen quite as much as it used to. Okay, so that may be reflected in our aspect of individualism versus collectivism there, and the changes in the cultures that we've had over the past, 50 years. You can think about what life was like in the 1950s versus what life is like today. Last example, it applies to other cultures as well. You have, in, say, Southeast Asia, you have these Buddhist monks who are fishermen. If you're a Buddhist monk, you're forbidden to kill anything. So how can you be a fisherman if you are a Buddhist monk? And the idea behind that is they justify it by saying, well, catch a fish and we throw it up on the bank, and if it happens to die, it happens to die. It's, it's its choice, right? Place the blame on the fish rather than what you're doing to the fish, okay? Another example would be freedom and equality, but we have a history of racism and slavery as well. All right, so you got ideal and real, and then we have high and low culture. High and low culture. With high culture, we're talking about maybe the upper 1%. The upper 1% or the upper echelon when it comes to high culture. And then low culture is the masses. That's everybody else. Sound good? High culture is the very top, and then low culture is the masses. Sometimes when I present this to students, the desire, and it's probably natural for all of us, is to think, man, I hope I fall into that category of high culture, right? What is it that I can do to make sure that I'm inside of that particular category? But the reality is we're not. We're all part of low culture, right? It's really just everybody else's low culture. So when you think about music, high culture would be what? What would be high culture? Genre of music. Classical music would be closer, right, to high culture. Now, could the masses, listen to classical music? Yeah, that may be so. I'm thinking of one particular thing associated with music, one version of it.
Operas?
Yeah, right. So I usually use it this way, and some students don't know what the other version is. So if you go to the opera, right? Has anybody gone to the opera before? Nobody's gone to the, okay. So it works well for us, right? So that's high culture, right? First off, most of it's like in some foreign language, right? How in the world am I supposed to understand what's going on? And then the appreciation of the opera in itself. That's just beyond myself, right? So that's high culture. And then I usually counter that with low culture would be a soap opera then. Do you guys know what a soap opera is? Right? Soap opera is like daytime television, like, anybody know any soap operas off the top of your head right now? Days of Our Lives, right? So it would be like the person that stays home all day, not really working, having a job or anything like that. And so what do they fill their time up? Oh, I got to follow the soap opera. I do it every day, right? So that would be low culture. That's the masses, okay? So two good ideas there. How do they conflict with one another? High culture and low culture. Of course, high culture has a sense of superiority, right? And they look down on the low culture. Think of them as being inferior to them, less than them, okay? What they do is right, and evidently what low culture does is wrong. So a lot of ethnocentrism going on there. Low culture sometimes look at high culture and does it in a similar way as well, right? For example, if you go to like an art museum, that's something like high culture, like abstract art, right? Somebody that's part of low culture going in and looking at some of this abstract art, a lot of times, at least my perception is, man, I could have done that, right? You see some of this artistic work, it's like somebody took a bucket of paint and just threw it on a wall, right? It took them 30 seconds to do it. They walk away from it. And they're like, that's worth $5 million right there, right? with the abstract art. So I usually put it this way. Sometimes, I got the guy taking out the garbage. High culture looks down on low culture thinking that they are garbage, right? In that particular case, right? But then the low culture looks at the high culture art and they're like, that's garbage, right? So they have it kind of going both ways. So the perception is not necessarily positive. They do conflict with one another that way, okay? Another area of high culture, low culture, think about sports, right? We've kind of hit on this before. There's high culture sports, anything associated with equestrian, and polo in that aspect, right? Fencing, that's high culture. Anybody do any fencing around here? Nobody does that, right?
I know someone like.
You know somebody that does fencing?
Eureka that
Interesting. So it's kind of an exception.
Did at some point.
Was that?
Or they did at some point.
They
I don't
did
know
at
if
one
they
point in
still do.
time, all right? Yeah. But the low culture would be like football, baseball, basketball, soccer, right? That's low culture stuff there, okay? I always say, high culture, they go to the theater. And then low culture, they go to the movies, the theater. There's a difference there as well, okay? I always thought initially, when I started teaching this stuff, I would say that my wife is high culture and I was not, or I am not. Every time that I would have a birthday or something, Christmas or something like that, my wife was buying me clothes as if my clothes weren't good enough. She couldn't be around somebody that wore, I used to say Wranglers, but evidently Wranglers are kind of expensive today. Like have you guys seen I was talking, Miss Brown, you're aware of this? How much does Wranglers cost today?
They're really expensive.
Like the really intense horseback riding Wranglers, right?
Mm-hmm.
They can get like a few $100, right, for a pair of jeans. It's like, what in the world, right? Wranglers I grew up with, you get them for $12, right? At Farm and Fleet or Big R or something like that, right? So that was low culture. All right. Subculture and counterculture. Most are found in highly industrialized modern metropolitan areas. Again, that goes back to our very beginning of the slide, complex type of environment because of our post-industrial society. Examples of subcultures. These are some extreme, you see subcultures all the time, but these are some extreme examples, like the Amish. They would be a subculture. They're in the United States. They have some type of American cultural aspects, so they're a part of the American culture, but they definitely have some different norms than everybody else, okay? You've heard of biker gangs, right? They're part of the American culture, but again, they have their own social norms as well that are separate and different. You could say anything like gangs, right? Like other gangs in Chicago, right? You could even say like certain groups in school. Miss Faye's not here, but the FFA, they have certain, that's a subculture. There's a country culture, right? But they're a part of the American culture, okay, as well. Bandos have a culture, right? They're a subculture. They're a part of the American culture, but they have their own unique folkways in there as well. Okay, sound good? Subcultures, they have a tendency to be a little bit ethnocentric. They have a tendency to say what we do is right, right? It's important to, get involved in agriculture if you're an FFA person, right? We're doing things the right way. And so it's natural for them to look down upon people that are not a part of their group. It's important to practice cultural relativism as much as possible. So, why does somebody get involved in the FFA? Well, it's usually because their family environment that they're socialized in has some background in agriculture, right? Same thing with like bandos. Why do you get involved in band? Well, it's usually because a parent played a musical instrument when they were growing up, right? But when you come to that awareness, then it helps you to appreciate that individual rather than disrespect them. All right. Last thing, countercultures. What are countercultures? Countercultures are cultures or subcultures that go in the exact opposite direction of what the mainstream culture does. So anything that the mainstream culture tries to promote, the counterculture will try to take that variable, spin it, and go the opposite direction. Okay, so that's what your homework assignment is going to be on today. You're going to look at the counterculture of the 1960s. All right, so I'll give you some examples. Traditional culture of the 1950s says that you would have a family. You would have man, woman, and then you would have children. That would be the family. The counterculture movement in the 1960s said, having a spouse and marriage, that's confining. And so what they developed was a communal system, right? Everybody lived in just a community, right, as a group. And there's no partners, right? Everybody is a part of it's one big, huge, giant family, okay? The communal system that they developed. Another one would be, you hear about, what was the name of that? There was it was in 1969, they had this Woodstock. You guys ever heard of Woodstock before?
Yes.
Okay. So with Woodstock, just the event, they got all these rock bands together and stuff. Just everybody that went was usually reflecting this counterculture idea of society tells you not to use drugs. All right, let's use drugs. Society tells you to wear clothes. All right, we're not wearing clothes. All right. Society tells you these are the rules concerning your behavior. All right, we're not doing that anymore. We're doing the exact opposite. Okay, so that's what a counterculture does. They just try to take all the norms and spin it and go the opposite direction. Sound good? All right. Mainly the reason for that is they can't succeed, or they're not succeeding in the mainstream culture. So what they do is that's their way of rebelling and getting back that way. Anybody have any thoughts on variations in culture before we finish up today? No? All right.